of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be always acceptable, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Please be seated. You might think, from our readings today, that you're now going to hear a talk about natural history. You know, cedar trees and mustard plants. But of course, these readings are not actually about cedar trees or about mustard plants. They are meditations on the relationship between human and divine agency. The prophet Ezekiel, I would recommend that you not build too much of your theology on the prophet Ezekiel. We read little snippets from the prophet Ezekiel, and we leave out big chunks because honestly, the man was probably crazy. But this is a beautiful little passage. Ezekiel has been in parable form telling the history of the destruction of the kingdom of Israel and the strife between Babylon and Egypt. And he's now in metaphorical terms prophesying that eventually the kingdom of Israel will be reestablished by God. Ezekiel, we think, was one of the priests in the Jerusalem temple who was brought with the king into exile in Babylon, and his prophecies were from Babylon. And he is talking about this vision of God reestablishing the kingdom of Israel, only he sees it in metaphorical terms as a cedar tree. And the cedar tree in this parable puts forth fruit. Now, the cedars that he's talking about are probably different than the cedars around here, but you know what a cedar tree is like. Does it grow fruit? No. So this is a miraculous cedar tree that puts forth fruit as well as growing to a great height. Similarly, you probably know what a mustard plant looks like. Does it grow to a great height and do birds roost in its branches? No mustard plant that I've ever seen does that. You know, it's sort of a weedy shrub. This is a miraculous mustard plant. Jesus is talking not about mustard, but about the kingdom of God and about how through God's agency, through divine agency, miracles happen. Things grow beyond their normal size. Now, does this mean that Jesus is saying that humans have no agency in this? That it doesn't matter what we do because God will just make everything okay? I don't think so. These little parables about the kingdom of God come after the central parable in this gospel, which is the parable of the sower. And you remember the parable of the sower is, you know, the sower sows the seed, and some of it falls on stony ground and doesn't grow, and some of it falls on good soil, but then the weeds grow up and smother it, and some of it falls on good soil. But the point of the parable is the sower, his or her job is just to sow the seed and not We're not accountable for what happens, but we are accountable for sowing the seed. The kingdom of heaven is not something that we can cause to happen. But we can help it. We can sow the seed. And perhaps we can avoid sowing weed seeds. What is it to sow the seed? How do we partner with God in God's creation of the kingdom of God? Well, today is Father's Day, and we all know, how fathers can sow the seed by being kind, by modeling responsible behavior, by loving. As fathers or mothers or whatever kind of parent, we know that we cannot control how our children grow, but we can sow good seed, or we can sow weeds. We know that, a father who is abusive might take 3 generations for the family to heal from that. A father who is loving and kind, consistent, can help that healing, can help children grow. Our parables, our readings today are not about cedar trees or about mustard plants. But I think it's important to note that these are the metaphors and the parables to which the prophets reach, to which Jesus reaches, because it perhaps in past generations they didn't need to be reminded of this, but we need to be reminded that we humans do not exist in isolation from the rest of nature, that we evolved for millions of years to be to live in the woods, to live in the natural world. And if the cedar trees are suffering, we are suffering too. The human and divine agency also interacts in nurturing the plants and the animals around us, in addition to how we nurture our children. So you can plant or you can destroy. You can help the little seedlings grow by pulling up the weeds around them and giving them some water, or you can trample on them. God's healing and power and love works independently of human agency. But we humans also have some agency. We humans can partner with God in that vision of love and respect and flourishing. And Jesus, I believe, also reminds us that we don't see the fruits of this right away. Parenting is many, many, many moments which don't seem to produce much results. Help rocking a colicky child while they cry does not feel like an inherently rewarding activity. And the child is not going to the next day become an adult and say, "Thank you for your love, Daddy." The little trees that we planted out there, right now, are about this big, and you can't see them over the grass. It's going to be many, many years before they become a tree. Our intentions are not immediately rewarded with results. But when we are partnering with God, we have assurance that in the long run, they will be. God gives the growth. We can plant, we can water, we can weed, knowing that God's kingdom is growing invisibly while we work.